Howdy, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Rain Race Podcast. I'm your host, GT Rain, joined alongside me, as always, every other Tuesday, off in the Esses. How are you doing tonight?
Every other Tuesday-ish,
Ish. I was not going to be the one to correct myself, but go ahead.
No, it's good. We are coming off a great season opening WEC race, and we have more sports car racing right around the corner. We actually have some sports car racing this weekend as well, supporting Indy at St. Pete. So, we're not fully into the swing of the season yet, but it's coming quick. It's coming quick. Weather's great up here too. It feels like summer. So sports car racing is for the summertime.
Sports car racing is back. Yeah, it's for the summertime, for January, for November in the WEC. It's basically a year-round endeavor at this point. We had a couple months in the off season, but that's all behind us now. We had the opening race of the. All right, see, I noticed you said WEC, and I don't know if you saw my Twitter, but I'm very passionate about this issue.
Well, we can go off on this a little bit because I think it was a team that put together like a short form clip, and they were asking people in the paddock, right?
It was Nielsen Racing, yeah. That's propaganda. I choose to drain that out. All right, I'm not listening to them. No, all right. Let's get a little more serious here. I'll say WEC. Call it what you want. Season opener at Qatar for the first time in championship history. Elephant in the room. Was I disappointed that the season opener was not at Sebring? Yes. Was I disappointed that I didn't get to watch a race on a Friday afternoon while I was trying to multitask and work? No, I am quite glad, even though it was starting at 3 o'clock in the morning my time, that it was on a Saturday, or at least on the weekend where motorsports belong. And get your pitchforks out, all right? Because I'm going to say something pretty controversial here, but dare I say, I think the season opener at Qatar put on a better race than WEC did in their 3 years at Sebring. All right, I'll say it up front. I think looking back at it, the 2019 GTE race was probably the peak, GTE Pro, I guess, to be more specific. Race at Sebring for the WEC race was peak 1,000 miles of Sebring. Now, of course, the 12 hours has had its fair share of incredible moments, but I'm treating that as a whole separate entity right now. I think as a pure race, especially looking at the top class, we saw a little bit more action out of Qatar this past Saturday than we have in Sebring in years past. Now, down to cars being a little bit closer right now, down to having more cars on the grid.
Yeah.
We'll see. But I will say I think Qatar put on a better race than I was expecting. The thing is with racing is sometimes you got to keep your expectations low. And my expectations were a little bit low, admittedly, when the drivers were saying it's going to be very difficult to pass this track. This track's designed for motorcycle racing. Formula One started going there in 2021. They went there last year, but really haven't seen a whole lot of car racing on that track. And drivers were saying during the prologue week, it's going to be hard to pass offline here. It's going to be a single line race. Traffic's going to be a mess. But overall, I think it had its fair share of moments. And for the first time in championship history, it actually went the length of the advertised distance, and it did not go time certain, which I'll raise my hand and say I was wrong about, because I think on at least 2 occasions I've said there's no way they were going to go the full distance, but I'll give them credit. There were no safety cars. There were only 2 full course yellows, and they made it there with, I think, all 4 minutes to spare on the 10-hour time certain cap.
I could hear you, like your voice in my head, talking about how you didn't think it was going to go the full distance as I saw the laps ticking down. And I'm like, are they going to do this or not?
Yeah, I mean, I was doing my mental calculations. I was like, all right, we're at halfway through right now. How many hours has it been? I was like, it was going to be pretty close. If there was a single safety car, you could throw it out the window. But I'll give them credit. They finally did it. Which is something that they never would have done at Sebring, because there was no way that they were going to get the full 1,000 miles in with the lap time.
Somebody breaking down somewhere bad. Yeah.
I did the math, and even if they were running qualifying laps in the hypercars at Sebring consistently for 10 hours straight, they would not be able to hit the full 1,000 miles. So Why they called it that, I guess it was just to separate it from the 12 hours that was happening the next day, but at least they made it this time. A lot to talk about though from Qatar, and I do see there are some messages in the chat that I'll be trying to get to as I go through here. But if you have any questions or you want to yell at me and tell me that I'm wrong, because I think some people are already doing that about Qatar, you can let us know, and I'll try to get to that in this episode. We had the debut in the Hypercar class for Alpine, BMW, Lamborghini, and Asada Fraschini, 4 new manufacturers in the championship for the second year in a row. I'll say it was pretty clear from practice and qualifying very early on in the weekend, and of course we had the prologue right before the race weekend, that none of them really had race-leading pace. And maybe that's not to be expected, especially in the WEC. It's sort of a mimic of what we saw last year at Sebring. Well, I guess Ferrari was strong in the opening race at Sebring last year with that qualifying on pole, but apart from that, in the races early on in the season, it really seemed like Toyota was using that advantage of skill, or not the skill, but the advantage of prior knowledge from those tracks. Everybody on this track was on level footing, and I do think that that brought some interesting things forward that I'll try to discuss in a little bit here. No major woes, though, from any of the new manufacturers. I mean, we had Asada Fraschini go out with a suspension issue about 6 hours into the race. One of the BMWs was in the garage for a little while. The Alpines really seemed like they were the strongest of the new cars that we had seen. But I didn't see any major concern from any of them. In fact, some people are quick to joke that the Asada Fraschini is really another Vanwall or another Glickenhaus. It's just going to sit at the back of the field. But I will give them credit on one thing, and that's they were the second heaviest car in the class. There is definitely room for, with the balance of performance, for that car to get a little bit quicker. They certainly don't have the strongest driver lineup in the class, and I think they're well aware of that. But under the right conditions, they were setting 143s in race pace, and really only put them a second off some of the other manufacturers. Porsche, up at the front, I think they set a 39 at one point in the race, but they were sort of in a field of their own for the most part. But I think that give them some time, give them some more experience, and maybe they get a little bit of break with the BOP. And I don't think they're going to be as far down the field as some people might have initially thought. Lamborghini, to me, was the one manufacturer that seemed like maybe would be disappointing if I was a fan of them. Really just sort of sitting at the back pace-wise, sort of, apart from the Asada Fraschini, but of the OEM manufacturers, really in the back all week. They had a nice little battle going on with Ferrari at one point in the race, though, but it was for, I think, 17th and 18th. And BMW as well, sort of shadowing what they have in IMSA, where at certain races the pace just really isn't there, especially what we saw from them at Daytona last year with the debut of that car. Wasn't really 100% there pace-wise, but I'm sure give WRT some experience, and they will be able to find that car closer to the front of the field. We also had the debut of the new LMGT3 class. We had the 9 different manufacturers there. One of the things I picked out from that, strong pace-wise, but reliability woes for the Corvette Z06 GT3R. We were talking about that in the Daytona Rolex 24 review, and they struggled with reliability at that race with the factory Corvettes. And here, now in the hands of customer racing, customer TF Racing, had some transmission issues with that car. And like I said, they were up front pace-wise for a lot of the race, but really sort of an interesting thing, because you would think the Corvette is sharing quite a few parts from the C8R GT3 adaptation that came before it, but not 100% there reliability-wise from the first 2 races we've seen out of that car.
Yeah, it was a little bit concerning seeing the issues that Corvette have had in the first couple of races, and they sure don't have an easy one coming up next with Sebring as the next one on the calendar for them. So you hope that they can figure out some of those issues sooner rather than later, but definitely some gremlins with that new car, it seems.
Yeah. And apart from that, LMGT3, I will say, as happy as I thought I would be to see 9 different manufacturers on the grid. You can complain all you want about GT3 racing. You can say it's a shame that we don't have GTE anymore, and I'll agree with you on some of those points. But to see that many manufacturers and that many cars, we first saw what GT3 did to GT Racing at IMSA, and now we're seeing the same effect in the World Endurance Championship. We're going to see even more GT3 cars at Le Mans this year. My net takeaway from that is only positive. I was really happy to see that many manufacturers, and for the most part, a lot of those manufacturers were on a similar pace level. The funny part I did notice is there was a certain part of the race where it was Porsche, Corvette, and Aston Martin, I think 1 through 6. And with the exception of Ferrari, it sort of looked like what we had last year with the final year of the GTE regs, where those were the final manufacturers sticking around. And lo and behold, up front at the debut of the GT3 class. But really excited to see what moments we get out of that class this year. And I think that Qatar was only the start of that. We also, continuing down the list of new things we had, the Hyperpole qualifying format. Now, I don't know if you got a chance to watch the Hyperpole or qualifying in general for that race, which was early on Friday morning for us in the East Coast of North America. But if you're not up to speed with it, 12-minute main session and then a 10-minute top 10 shootout, essentially, for both classes. So 4 sessions total, or 2 sessions total with 2 classes each. I'll just sit and say I'm indifferent about it. You know what? I think F1 has a stronger case, and I guess IndyCar and other championships, if you want to go down that route, have a stronger case for knockout style qualifying because qualifying matters more.
Yeah.
I didn't really get the sort of edge of my seat, this really matters vibe watching cars fight to get into that top 10 shootout. It's an extra element. It's an extra thing of action. And since there's only 2 classes this year and it's down from the 4 that we had a few years ago, it's, I guess, nice to have something to extend the session a little bit with, but I wouldn't say that it was anything that I was on the edge of my seat about. The cars that were up front in the regular session, we also saw up front in the Hyperpole session for the most part. So I'll give it a little bit more time. I'm not seeing it as a negative, but it's nothing exceptionally different to me, at least. Don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Are they qualifying for points? Do they get championship points from that?
Yeah, they get, if nothing changed, they got 1 singular point for qualifying on pole. So a little bit on the line, but I will say that meant that for the first time in championship history, Penske was leading the championship after qualifying.
Yes.
So they didn't have to go far, though, to extend that lead. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Early on in the race, the first thing I noticed, apart from the fact that we really do need split screen TV production for the start of the races because they were switching between Hypercar and GT3, and I don't envy the production crew at all for the start of the race with how much action was going on in those first 5 to 10 laps. But the number 2 Cadillac, for the 3rd WEC race in a row, struggled into turn 1. At Fuji last year, they locked up, ran one of the Toyotas wide. At Bahrain last year, they locked up, punted one of the Toyotas off track, or spun them out, I guess. And here they got loose and hit. Who did they hit? Was it one of the Porsches, the Proton Porsche? I'm already forgetting.
Somebody got into the Peugeot, didn't they?
Oh,
was it them? I thought somebody got into the Cadillac who got in.
No, I think if I'm remembering the replay correctly, I believe the Cadillac lost it on their own. Okay. I rewatched the replay. Maybe I'm wrong, but from my view, that's what it looked like. I can't remember who they took out, though. I thought it was the Proton Porsche, but I'm drawing a blank right now. Somebody will have to help me out on that.
The Peugeot definitely spun around turn 1.
Who did?
I think it was the 94, the 94 Peugeot.
Okay, so that's who they spun out then. Yeah, and if they did lock up again, and it wasn't a dramatic lockup, but it looked like they might have just had a slight lockup and then gotten a little bit loose. gone into the 94. It would be the third race in a row where they've had issues going into turn one, and you'd think by now, and I said this after Bahrain, but you'd think they would try to back it up a little bit at the start, but I don't know, that car on cold brakes especially seems like it's really struggling, and it was one of the ones that was struggling at Daytona last year, I know, as well, for the debut of that car. They were saying with the new brake-by-wire system that was struggling. Okay, so now people are saying it got hit from the 83 Ferrari, and then the Caddy hit the 94. I thought the Cadillac had gotten penalized, though, at the start. I will have to review that because evidently I don't know enough about what I'm talking about here. But I thought the Cadillac received a penalty and they were deemed at fault for that. Apart from that, continuing on with the race, you want to talk about Porsche and how strong Porsche has been. I talked about this after Daytona, where they won that race. But I talked about the reliability of the Porsche 963 right now. And we saw a continuation of that at Qatar. They're up to 5 cars now between the 2 factory cars, the 2 customer Jodas, and the 1 customer Proton. Didn't really see any reliability issues for the 963 in Qatar, which was for all intents and purposes, 10-hour race. Didn't really have any issues at Daytona either. Clearly the reliability upgrades that they were doing in the off-season seem to be paying dividends right now.
Yeah, that's like, what, 150 or so hours, maybe 150, a little bit under that. I think, yeah, about 150 hours of running with no issues on those cars between Daytona and Qatar now. So that's pretty impressive. You think where they were last year, and it seems like those improvements that they were making over the off season really helped. They also still have some that are on the way too. I think it's a new drivetrain that they have that's kind of waiting in the wings. Well, I guess we'll have to see if they look to when they look to debut that. But
I believe it's a new crankshaft.
Oh, was it a new crankshaft? Okay.
Yeah, and I think that just got delayed to after Le Mans. So
okay.
I guess the first race after that would be Watkins Glen for IMSA. Whether we see it there or at a future race in the WEC, we'll see. But yeah, more things coming with that Porsche on the reliability front.
Yeah.
And
it worked. It looked strong.
Yeah. And you look at that and then you start thinking, okay, Porsche had a disappointing season last year, I think, in the WEC. All things considered, they had a strong run at Fuji, but Le Mans was pretty disappointing from them. What a lot of people have been saying this week, and I agree with 100%, is we're seeing a different Porsche Penske Motorsport right now. And even just beyond Penske, we're seeing a different Porsche 963 right now. You can talk all you want about maybe they had a favored car with the BOP at Qatar or not. You know, you can make that argument all day, but what we saw at Qatar was really a dominant performance out of Porsche on both the factory and the customer front. So, going over to the results of the race, the number 6 Porsche Penske Motorsport won the race overall in the hypercar category. Not without fault. They had some drama going on in the final hour with one of the Lexuses in the LMGT3 class. Some up in arms there whether they should have gotten a penalty or not. Ultimately, it was the Lexus that ended up getting a 10-second penalty for that one, which I think, if anything, it was a racing incident. I mean, it's definitely the responsibility of the faster car to pass cleanly. You might argue that the Lexus closed the door a little bit, but ultimately their race was thrown away entirely because of that impact. So it was sort of self-penalized. But we could argue on that all you want. In second place, it was the new Joda 963, the number 12 Joda from Will Stevens, Callum and Norman Nato. That came after the very late race disappointing loss from the last race of the wingless Peugeot 9X8. The 93 car really ran what seemed to me as a flawless race up until the final 2 laps. A little bit off Porsche pace-wise, but they were only about 30-ish seconds off the lead. And it looks like, from the reports that we're getting right now, that they actually ran out of fuel. with a couple laps left. They said that they left the fuel connected to the car in the final splash for long enough, but evidently the fuel was not flowing into the car for that entire duration, and it ran out of fuel with about 2 laps left in the race. Now, they tried to salvage that and tried to bring the car home on the hybrid system, which you are allowed to use the hybrid system. If your car breaks down, if you have engine issues, or I guess if you run out of fuel. I think that was the first case we've really seen this. But the rule is that you have to bring it back into the pit lane and either get it back running on the engine again, or if not, you'd have to retire the car, I guess. Outside of that, you're not allowed to run the car under the minimum hybrid deployment speed that's dictated by the BOP. For the Peugeot in that race, it was 150 kph, and of course they were deploying it at about 10. Ultimately, they were disqualified for that, and the fact that they didn't bring the car to park firm after the race, I believe. So a couple of different factors there. They tried to cross the line on the electric power alone and did not come back into the pits at the end of the lap. So gutting blow for the end of that car. It looked really strong at Qatar. I think that was a track that a lot of people are saying favored that car. Really flat, smooth surface where they were able to generate the most ground effects to make that car effective. But in the end, it wasn't the fairy tale story that a lot of people were hoping for. They'll be debuting that new car with the wider tires and the rear wing at Imola, which is the next race out in about 5 weeks or so. In third place, though, it was the other factory Porsche 963, the number 5 Penske Porsche Motorsport. Again, they were having a great battle with Jota at the end of the race. In fact, one thing to mention with the Peugeot before I fully move on is the three of them were having a great battle between the 93, the 12, and the 5 car. All for second place in the final few laps, and then the 93 obviously had their issue, and then we thought maybe we'd see a last-minute thing out of Matt Campbell at the end of the race, but we didn't end up seeing him get by the 12 car in the final couple of laps. Although I'd give him another lap or two, I think he probably would have been able to do it.
Yeah.
Fourth place, Cadillac, though. Got a lot to talk about with Cadillac later on in this episode. And then in fifth place, I'll just round out the top 5. We had the customer AF Corsa Ferrari 499P, that famous yellow livery right now. It's just becoming a bit of a fan favorite. And I'll bring that up later on as well when we start talking about customer racing, or customer cars in the hypercar class. Couple other things that I had wanted to discuss. Porsche also clean sweep of the podium. That's the first podium sweep, I believe, since 2015. And Porsche also won the LMGT3 class with Manthey Pure Racing in the number 92 car. So a sweep of the podium in the hypercar class and a sweep of the WEC race in total for Porsche.
And I think is it Nico Mueller was a part of like the other 3 previous podium
Andre
sweeps?
Lauderer.
Was it Andre Lauderer? Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Well, Nico Mueller was in the Peugeot, unfortunately, so that didn't have that same luck this weekend around. But
yes,
Andre Lauderer was in the previous podium sweeps as well. Nice little trend, a nice little stat going for him there. And also the first time that we had a German, I was going to say team, but I guess technically Toyota is a German team, depending on how you want to think about it, based in Cologne. But the first time we had a German manufacturer on the overall podium in a WEC race since 2017, which if you told me that back in 2016, 2017, when Audi and Porsche were absolutely dominating, I'd call you crazy. And I think that covers the things I wanted to discuss for Qatar. I'm going to go back and see what other people were saying about the race.
I know one of the questions here from Ananas Studio is, what did y'all think of the Losail circuit? I think it's not very good for endurance racing, let alone car racing. It shouldn't come back on the WEC calendar. Well, I mean, I don't remember how long the deal is that they have locked in there for, but they're definitely going back.
Long time.
They're definitely going back. I I agree with what you said at the top, where the race actually, it was better than I thought was expecting it to be. But I just found it was such a boring track to look at. Like, it reminds you a lot of kind of, like that Paul Ricard, like it's kind of a parking lot that they've drawn some lines in. It's so wide as well that, like, which can be good, but I don't know. It was so wide, except in that, I don't remember what corner it was, like the corner that was essentially going through a gravel quarry, with how much gravel is chucked out on the track. I was watching that, and oh man, a
lot of people surprised they didn't try to clean that up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they didn't get an opportunity to, but at the same time, like, I feel like that would have been justified. It was like the halfway mark in the race when it was looking like that, or at least when I noticed it. And, just throw the yellow. So much of the race to go. Just get it cleaned up, because there was a lot of cars that were going off there or had big moments in that race. I mean, who was
Matt
it?
Campbell at the end of the race.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
what cost him P2.
Yep. Yeah, it cost them that spot, and you saw the Alpine go off. I don't remember who was it. Mick that was driving.
Yep.
Yeah, and man, there was some sketchy corners, or some sketchy not overtakes, but passes through that corner, I guess you could say. And I was surprised they didn't try and get that cleaned up.
You know what that is to me? That is peak WEC, avoiding throwing a safety car by all means necessary. And I think that's the main difference, I would say, to anybody between WEC racing and IMSA. Sure, the cars right now might be, for all intents and purposes, identical. Had that been an IMSA race, I'm willing to bet a lot of money they would have thrown a safety car to clean that up.
Well, let's be real. Somebody would have gone off and got stuck in the ground, P2 or something.
The WEC, it seems, for the most part, will try to avoid a safety car at all costs. I haven't seen a safety car in at least a few WEC races. And that's why you sometimes will look at the race results with a grain of salt. I mean, we had a 10-hour race, and some people will say, yeah, Porsche had a pretty hefty lead at the end of the race, 30-ish or so seconds. But all things considered, when you think that it was a 10-hour endurance race with no opportunity to bunch up the field, I think that was still a decently close result. Now, I went sidetracked a little bit there. The one thing I did forget to mention that I wanted to discuss was the light panel issue that the Porsche had. I don't believe, based on what other people were saying, other commentators during the race were saying, that they technically would have been breaking any rules because the track was fully lit, so it wasn't declared a proper night race. But they were really covering their bases at the end by bringing the car in and slapping that number board back in the car that fell off with the contact with the Lexus in the final hour of the race. Otherwise, the lead at the race would have been over a minute long. So yeah, my thoughts though on the track in general, I think it's all right. It was better than I was expecting it to be. Traffic was a little bit of a mess, but I think it's going to be worse at Imola, quite frankly.
Yeah.
As a season opener, I think there are better options. I personally would love to see a season opener go back to Silverstone. I would love to see a return of Silverstone on the calendar in general, but the first race of the season, you really want to make a statement. And I think the one key takeaway I got out of all of this is the two hardest tracks to overtake at this season are likely going to be Qatar and Imola. And they are the two races that we're starting out the season with. So I think as a middle of the season type deal, it would be all right. Would eventually like to see if another track can take its place as the season opener. But I think it was an all right track. Like you said, nothing visually crazy to look at. The attendance there was not phenomenal.
Yeah.
But we'll take it for what it is. All right. There's nothing we can do about it right now.
Not track related, but one of the things that kind of irked me a little bit, I guess I wish and this is an interesting complaint. I wish the WEC, when they put together their highlight pack from the
Yep.
race, did a bit of a better job with the cutting
Yep.
points and like splicing it all together, because I don't know, I was watching the highlights here to like jog my memory on everything, and it's like jumping so much from one thing to another, and I found it difficult to watch. Never mind, that those are designed for, a fan that is not, trying to just catch up on it, or like it'd be very difficult to follow along with, I think, if you didn't really know everything that was going on.
Right. And I agree with you on that. I was a bit vocal on Twitter about that. I was saying, why did it take them over 24 hours to get a highlights video up? The video now is doing very well. That they finally got it up. I think I saw like 200,000 views on it. But you can only imagine it would have more had they gotten it up right after the race was over, which I think there's no reason they weren't able to do that. But then also, yeah, in general, cuts around a little bit. I think they can do a better job at packaging that all up. And the thing I said is, WEC, I think, has some of the best content for motorsports YouTube. WEC All Access is a phenomenal series that they put on. They put on a great sort of event preview and then an event review after the race with analysis from Alexa Rendell and Sam Smith, and they get some of the drivers involved in their reviews as well. Great content that they put on there. And then the other 10% of the content, which, as I said in my tweet, arguably the most important and most viewed content, it seems like they slack a little bit on.
Yep.
Gold standard for highlights right now to me is F1. Talk all you want about the racing product, but their media presence right now is top of the line, and I think that that's the bar that all these other championships should be shooting for, no matter how large or small they may be.
IndyCar does a really good job with their race recaps as well. Like they have that super condensed one, and then they have like the 15-20 minute one that's a little bit longer. They do an exceptional job.
Yep. But I will say that it was, regardless of the fact that it can still be improved, the highlights were a step up this year compared to where they were last year, where they were still just doing like 3-minute cuts from the broadcast that they put at the end of the production. But improvement that you can still make, sure. We were talking about our thoughts on the track, and Mr. Waffles is in the chat being pretty blunt and saying Qatar sucked. I never want to hear graining again. Yeah, it was one of the things, the graining on the tires from some teams more than others. I know Toyota was complaining about that. I think Ferrari was complaining about graining on the tires. Some of the heavier cars in the class especially seemed like they were struggling with that. And the hard tire for a lot of the race, actually most of the race, it seemed like the hard tire was the one to be on. There was one stint where the 93 car had to switch over to the mediums. Don't know if it was because they didn't have enough hard tires left in their stockpile or what it was. But they were really struggling at the end of that stint and losing some of the time to the customer Porsches and the leading 6 car as well. Decent in the first half and fell off halfway through. Yeah, the first 10 minutes of the race were really the nonstop action. And that's where I was like, oh, is this were we all wrong about this? Is this going to be an absolute classic race? But yeah, when you get the field spreading out like that and you don't have a safety car to bunch up the field again, that's pretty much what I expected out of that race for the most part. They went out of their way to give the number 6 the W, yeeting the Lexus the sticker. Balance of performance. Porsche winning makes good headlines, I guess, but yeesh. All right, if I can go off on a tangent here a little bit, this is going to be a very long season if we hear about BOP before, during, and after every single race. And it's only, I think, being fueled by the fact that we have more manufacturers in the championship now, which means more people with allegiance to certain manufacturers and certain teams and certain drivers. It's a necessary evil. We had a whole episode about BOP. I really hate talking about BOP because I don't think there's many... There's positives that come out of it, but there's not many positives to talk about with it.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it at that. But yeah, it's always going to be it for now. But it will always be one of those things that people bring up, and we're just going to have to learn to live and respect it, I suppose. Alpine looked good for their first race, is another thing that was said there, and I agree with that. I said that earlier on. I think that's a great baseline for that team. to my knowledge, didn't have any real reliability issues, which people were saying that they were concerned about the Mechachrome with that car, the engine in that car being unreliable. We saw that engine in the past with the Ginettas back when they were run in 2019 as well. But yeah, I didn't see anything out of a 10-hour race so far. Le Mans will be the ultimate test for that car, but I'll be interested to see how they hold up. And pace-wise, off a little bit, but I think of all the new teams, as I said earlier, they were probably the strongest. Great to see Alpine do well. Having one car. Okay, so this was about the Cadillac. Having one car in Hypercar isn't a good move against an army of Porsches. Absolutely going to talk about that. Later on in this episode as well. Talking about the Porsche reliability updates and. See, it's great that there's a lot of things for me to read over here. It just means there's a lot of discussion here. Second only to Toyota in heartbreaking finishes for the 9X8. Yeah,
true.
At least the one consolation thing that people were always saying is at least it wasn't the last lap at Le Mans. You know, we can take a losing P2 on Qatar with 2 laps to go. It's better than losing Le Mans in the final lap. And as I said, the toughest losses for teams always make for the greatest victories, and Peugeot's still been fighting for that illustrious first win with that car. And it'll come someday, I'm sure. And when it does, it'll be even sweeter now.
Well, you heard it here first. Chris thinks that Peugeot's going to win a race with that car. So,
well, if you look at the performance they had at Qatar, I mean, they were a strong car. They were probably the only manufacturer pace-wise within a prayer of challenging the Porsche. We saw at Le Mans last year. And the thing about that car is people's expectations with that car, and I don't know if it's because of the whole no rear wing situation, but people's expectations with that car are always low as well. Yeah. And when that car was leading at Le Mans last year, that turned a lot of eyes as well. They were the strongest car in the rain last year. They're probably going to lose that advantage, if I'm honest, because they're not going to be deploying the hybrid energy at 150 kph instead of 190 anymore once they get those wider tires. But they've put in some surprising results, and I think that they still have more pace to show when they get the upgrades on that car. But just a couple of people saying they didn't like the track, saying it's similar to Bahrain, just a little bit bland. As a fan who started watching the WEC since Le Mans last year, how was racing for the WEC at Silverstone? Was it better? Silverstone put on some great races back in the early, well, not quite early, but the LMP1 hybrid era, 2015, 2016. Audi and Porsche had some phenomenal battles in 2015. You can go back and watch those clips on the WEC YouTube channel. I think to this day, there's still some of the most viewed clips on that channel. And the other thing about Silverstone is just there's a huge number of passionate racing fans who will turn out to Silverstone. Yeah. And that's the other big thing that we're missing from Qatar and we're missing from Bahrain. Probably the 2 least attended races on the schedule. My favorite tracks on the schedule last year, obviously Le Mans, Monza, and Fuji. And you can talk all you want about the on-track action that those tracks put on, but they also have the best fan interaction. If you get the opportunity to go back and watch the first lap at Monza with no commentary, and you'll hear the crowd going absolutely electric when the Ferrari took the early lead into the first chicane, and then the collective groan when they got turned around by the Toyota about a half second later. You just don't sort of get that energy at some of these other tracks, and for Qatar and Bahrain to be the season opener and the season finale, I just think there's a little bit of shuffling around there that could be done to make things a little bit more interesting. But yeah, track-wise, don't think it's the worst thing in the world. But Silverstone, absolutely would love to see it back in the schedule. I think that would put on a great race. Qatar's like Barber if it was made very flat and long. That's how I see the track. Yeah, there's a lot of turns on it. Large variety of turns. There's some slow speed, almost hairpin-like turns, some fast sweeping turns. So yeah, I can sort of see that. Yeah, echoing my sentiment about the attendance at Qatar. Silverstone fit right for these cars. Yeah, media side, we already discussed the highlights. So I'll try to get back to some of those later on a little bit. There's a lot of questions that we got, which is great. You can keep those coming. But I have I'm going to put you on the spot here, Stu, because one of the stories that we got in the 2 weeks since the last episode is yet another Rolex 24 post-race penalty, like 3-4 weeks after the actual race ordeal. And I read into a little bit. You made a whole video about it, and I think you're a lot more qualified to educate me and educate everybody listening to this podcast. What exactly happened in the GTD Pro class after the Rolex 24 this year?
Well, it's a little bit of the blind leading the blind. It's a very sort of unclear as to what exactly happened. And I don't know if we'll exactly get clarification on it. But for those of you that may have been in full WEC mode last week and missed it, it was BMW and Ferrari were penalized for exceeding their permitted performance levels at the Rolex 24. So obviously both of those manufacturers looked quite good over the course of the race. BMW, they ended up finishing third, it was, in GTD Pro, dropping out of contention late, where Ferrari, of course, won GTD Pro, finished second, third, and fourth in GTD, and man, they really looked dominant. As a result of these penalties, both the manufacturers are losing all of their manufacturer points. The prestigious IMSA Manufacturers Championship that they're all in pursuit of. And they were also fined $25,000, the manufacturers were. So hefty fine. But I guess the real thing from all of this is IMSA changed their BOP process going into this season to try and, work more closely with the teams and, develop this performance window with the teams in a really transparent way. This was, largely coming out of sort of the moaning and the groaning that we had. There's always going to be moaning and groaning about BOP, but last year at the Rolex, or in the 2023 Rolex, where, Porsche was way off the pace, Lamborghini was right there with them, and I think BMW was the other one that was considerably off the pace. The point of this new BOP process is to try and bring the manufacturers closer and, not have a car be completely uncompetitive as a result of BOP. So we don't really know what happened here, whether exactly what Ferrari and BMW did to put themselves outside of this performance window. If they just found a ton of pure pace in those cars, which I doubt in the time from the IMSA test to the Rolex, or if they were maybe sandbagging a little bit in these tests, we don't really know. And it doesn't seem like we're going to get great clarification on it. But it was obviously disappointing to hear this for the second year in a row that we're getting something like this. Not to compare this to what Meyershank Racing did last year, but pretty disappointing to have this news come out. Of course, something sort of similar-ish happened back in 2016 with Lamborghini when they were found to be sandbagging, and there was a similar, they lost all of their points. They were also issued a $25,000 fine. So I guess inflation doesn't exist in the fines world. But notably, they were given a stop and hold plus 5-minute penalty. So they were actually given a penalty on the race results. So
Right.
It seems like, based on the decisions from the past couple of years, it looks like IMSA doesn't want to, I guess I don't know how blatant you would have to go to get fully disqualified, but I also don't want to see, I don't want to find out how far somebody has to go. But yeah, just overall a disappointing situation. You don't want to see it. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on it, but
I do.
Yeah, disappointing.
I do have thoughts on it. So let me break this down here. And again, this is all about you educating me here, because I saw that the penalty was BOP related, and I said, "Oh, I'm not looking at that." So the new system that the manufacturers, now, is this a GT only thing? Is this in the GTP class as well?
Yeah, I believe it's in the GTP class as well.
Okay. So the manufacturers are told by IMSA that they have to provide an estimated performance target for that car. So they'll say, this is like the theoretical pace that we can get around Daytona, we think, with the current BOP. Am I right with that?
Yes, I think IMSA and the manufacturer work very closely together to sort of establish that window.
Okay. I immediately have an issue with that. And the issue I have is motorsports, endurance racing aside, not about going as fast as you possibly can, especially at the end of the race.
It is.
So why are we instituting these performance targets where if the car goes faster than that for a little while, you're now penalized because you were exceeding the expected performance of your car? I understand from a technical level why this exists, but from a purity standpoint, it just sort of rubs me the wrong way.
Yes, yes, it does. The whole situation is just kind of like a giant gray area because, like, they said that they're exceeding this performance window. I mean, what is exceeding the performance window? Because I'm sure there were other cars that went a bit faster than they did in testing. I mean, that obviously doesn't constitute a penalty, but like, what's the threshold? Are you like, how consistently are you exceeding this performance window that you're being issued a penalty that's not really that severe in the grand scheme of things? Because I mean, I guess it's something to the manufacturers, but it's clearly not enough that you're penalizing the teams or the drivers. Like, yeah, it's such a giant gray area.
It all centers back to how IMSA decides that they want to enforce their BOP or how they want to set it. Quite frankly, if I'm being brutally honest here, I think there's better ways of doing it than that. Again, I'm no genius. What those methods are, don't come to me for answers because I'm just some kid shouting into a mic on YouTube. But the entire system there, it's a bad headline. I'll say that much.
Oh yeah.
Where a car is essentially losing all of their manufacturer points. Now did the teams lose the points as well
No.
for the? No. Okay, so just the manufacturer.
The teams kept
points.
their full season championship points and Michelin and Endurance Cup points. The manufacturers lost their full season and Endurance Cup points,
and were fined as well.
Okay, $25,000.
Yeah. Really nothing for these manufacturers, but nonetheless, it's a poor headline to say that they were penalized for exceeding what was really expected of them performance-wise. Now, the other thing I have with this, the other issue I have is I can understand last year with the entire internal Honda discovery and then that being reported to IMSA and IMSA didn't discover it in their post-race teardown and tech inspection. How come this penalty right here took 3 weeks to be revealed? This to me seems like something that should have been shut case a week after the race at the latest. And I think that for the second year in a row, announcing a penalty like this is just not really a great look.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't understand why it took, 3 weeks or whatever the final timeline was. I assume there was probably some sort of an investigation that they were undertaking, but I mean, 3 weeks is a long time. I will note that they didn't make the results official. Last year, the results were made official before they found out about the Meyershank incident. This year, I remember I was checking in on the site every couple of days to see when the results were going to be made official. And I thought it was getting odd that it was so long before they were making these results official. And so I can only assume it was an investigation. But again, this is just like everybody's being left in the dark, it seems like, on what exactly this whole process was. I think it would be a lot. You go back to the Rolex 24, they waved the white flag a minute and 20 some seconds early they immediately came out and they said, hey, we messed up. Like this is what happens.
Yep.
People can move on from that. We can look at that and understand it and then, move on. We need some sort of like closure here to understand what their thought process was and why they're not getting outright disqualified or a heftier fine or penalty, so we can move on from this and not have something like this linger.
And it's not just the fans who are saying that, it's the manufacturers.
Yeah.
Because was it BMW?
Yep.
I think BMW was vocal about saying they want more transparency out of this. I don't know if other manufacturers were involved as well.
BMW said they were reaching out for clarity on the situation.
And how great is that for something that was unveiled 3 weeks again after the race was concluded? I mean, if this came out the day after, I could understand BMW saying, "Whoa, what's going on here?" But 3 weeks, you should have had probably ample time to clarify the justification and the rules for it. Again, for the second year in a row, it didn't really change anything in the results of the race, and I don't think this was this wasn't a case of blatant cheating that we saw from last year's Rolex 24, and I don't think it's going to have the same lasting impacts, or I almost guarantee it's not going to have the same lasting impacts as what we saw last year around. But what I will say is sports car racing, endurance racing in general, is a confusing form of racing. Okay, there's a whole alphabet soup that you have to jump into to become invested in sports car racing. Whether it's GTP, LMDH, GT3, I can go on, Hypercar. The more regulations that you have in place and the more sort of odd rules like this that you have to clarify, the harder it is for people, I think, to ultimately become really invested in it. So it's one of those things. It's just one of those things to me that I hope IMSA can provide some more clarity on the ruling itself, provide some insight into the process that they're using, that new process for balance of performance, because I don't want to see this become an issue common. Yeah. And I don't really think it will, but it's just one of those weird things that nobody was really expecting to read up on 3 weeks after the race. And here we are for the second year in a row discussing.
Yeah, there was like no other news coming out of the IMSA world. And then all of a sudden, this is the bombshell that we get dropped on us. And I think, the biggest takeaway from all of this for me is not that it's not the penalty itself. It's just kind of the lack of transparency that we're getting out of all of it. And, I'm not expecting like pure 100% transparency coming out of this, but like a little bit of an explanation for everybody to understand, I think would be nice. So, we kind of got, as time went on a little bit last year, I think John Doonan kind of opened up a little bit more about the whole Meyershank situation. And, he explained why they didn't want to, after the results were made official and everything like that, why they didn't full on disqualify them. So hopefully we'll get some more insight here as time goes on, but I just really wish we would have had that up front.
Yeah. And a couple of people already echoing that sentiment. Dove Jones in the chat saying the only thing here that is really buggy is there's little transparency here.
Yeah.
100% agree on that. I think you sort of said the same thing yourself. And in a studio, you guys should bring out Ewan Wayne. He would explain it all. I absolutely agree. I would love to have him on for a segment like this. Unfortunately, it's over in the UK where I think it's 1 o'clock in the morning right now, if I'm not mistaken. So we're not really in the friendliest time slot for the European listeners, at least on the live show. All right, so I'll move on from that. I want to bring it back to, I already teased this a couple times earlier in the episode on Cadillac customer cars in both the WEC and in IMSA with the GTP/Hypercar. Now, we got an official statement out of Laura Winthrop-Klauser at the 12 kilometers of Qatar. I'm going to link that article in the description on YouTube and in the show notes on podcast platforms. I advise you to go check out that article yourself because there's some interesting info in there. But I'm just going to read the base quote from Laura saying, "Customer cars are not happening. That's one thing I can say. We need to pay attention to what we have and work with that." Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not reading this right. "We need to pay attention to what we have and work with what we have. It doesn't make sense for us to go down that path at this point." Pretty clear point of intent there, that Cadillac is not interested in bringing customer cars. And I want to get some thoughts from you, Stu, on that. I want to get some thoughts from people in the chat if they want to chip in. But it's really a 180 on the stance that they had in the DPI class days. We've talked about that before. This is not the first time we've talked about customer Cadillacs in the new LMDH formula. But really, they were the leaders with the customer cars back in 2017, 2018, through most of the DPI era. They had a Spirit of Daytona with that DPI. They had Juncos Racing. They had JDC. JDC has now jumped ship over to Porsche. And now Porsche is by far and large the leader with the customer racing front in the new prototype categories. The question I have is really, is there any interest, any real substantial interest from teams on running these Cadillac customer cars right now? There's got to be a reason why Cadillac's not interested. Is it financial? Is Cadillac perhaps still trying to focus some resources on a Formula One program that may or may not ever happen? Or is there just lack of interest from teams? As I said, JDC, they jumped ship over to Porsche. Juncos, not sure if they're interested in bringing a prototype program back in any capacity. Spirit of Daytona is long gone at this point. So not really sure if there's anything to slot in there. The one thing I will say is if you don't have a customer racing car in the works, then you really need to properly evaluate a second car in the WEC for the full season.
Yeah.
Somebody in the chat mentioned it earlier, and I'm sorry I forget your name, but saying that the Cadillac program is going to struggle in the WEC with that one car. And the thing that I've picked out of it is they've actually had, when they don't have issues with the car or don't crash as they did at Spa last year, they have a pretty strong car in the WEC right now. They finished 5th at Qatar, finished on the overall podium at Le Mans last year. They had a very strong first half of the season last year in the WEC. And I think they're being held back right now by the fact that they don't have extra bullets in the chamber to lay back on. And the thing with Porsche is Porsche achieved a podium sweep at Qatar, and they're the only manufacturer, with I guess the exception of Ferrari, that's capable of even doing that in the first place. And Porsche has 5 cars, let alone 3. I think that's got to be the greatest indication to why customer racing is important, is what Porsche pulled off at Qatar. They were so comfortable at the end of that race where if the 6 car had a race-ending mechanical failure at the end of the race, well, I guess sans the last 2 lap, it would have again thrown into the hands of the 93 car. But let's pretend that car didn't exist. Then it goes over to the 12 Jota. It goes into the hands of the 5 car if something happens to the Jota. You had the 38 car, not that much further down the field. The 99 Proton didn't have the greatest race from a pace perspective. But you really have confidence in numbers out of Porsche right now. They're pooling a massive amount of data right now. And whether or not that's instrumental to their recent uptick in reliability, I'd say it has to play at least some part.
Had to help them play catch up, that's for sure.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I mean, you're pulling so much more data for the tracks. You're pulling so much more data for reliability. I've only seen it as a net positive, but ultimately it comes down to, is there any interest? And I want to get some of your thoughts on that as well.
I just yoinked out my headphones, so I'm good.
Oh, I was going to say...
I was so passionate that...
I was going to say, is there any thoughts from you on that as well? I'd like to get some of your thoughts on the lack of customer cars, both in IMSA and the WEC.
Yeah, I mean, you put it there pretty perfectly. Like, for Cadillac to change so drastically from where they were in the DPI era to where they are now is a little bit shocking. You know, when they first came out and they said, "Oh, you know, we're not going to do customer cars in year one. We're going to evaluate that for year two." You know, that makes sense. It's a brand new program. We're still coming out of COVID. Supply chain issues were a huge issue, and I guess to a certain extent, supply chain issues are still an issue. But like, the only thing that comes to my mind that would really prevent them from doing this, and it is F1. Like last year, I don't remember at what point it was last year, but I think Laura Weintraub-Klauser said something along the lines of when she was asked about, you know, bringing a second car to the WEC, and it was kind of alluded to that, you know, the budget isn't really there for that right now. And, you know, this was right around the time where them putting together this Formula One bid was kind of with Andretti was, you know, gaining steam, and, you know, again, that kind of made sense. But you got to wonder, like, what's the constraint here for them? Because I don't think that there's a lot of support that that the Cadillac would have to have for a successful customer program. I mean, you heard Porsche allude to it, how stretched thin, how their resources were really stretched thin last year, in terms of, you know, human power, because they have to have, you know, people from Porsche to be able to support these like engineers from Porsche to be able to support these customer teams, and then the parts as well. I know there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, but you mentioned at least a second WEC car. You think would at least be, you know, in the works. It's not going to be doubling the budget to get that second car on the grid. You know, it's going to be an incremental increase because you're already going to have a ton of the manpower there. All the, you know, a bunch of resources that you're already sending. So it really is disappointing. But then you also got to think about it from, you know, who else, what other LMDH or hypercar manufacturers are even truly offering a customer car. Porsche is, but they've kind of stepped back on that and said, you know, we're going to focus on our current customers that we have right now and help them, you know, sort of beef up their stable. BMW hasn't really mentioned anything of it. Acura is not. And Lamborghini's just entering the fold. On the hypercar side, you have Ferrari, but that's just the third a third not factory entry. So
right.
Yeah, I don't know. It's maybe there's just lack of interest from teams. Maybe, you know, Cadillac has done their homework, and, you know, the price that they would need to be charging for the car is just not something that teams are willing to step up and foot. But man, it is disappointing because that was supposed to be like one of the things with LMDH and the LMDH formula too, is, you know, build off that successful DPI formula. And one of the big successful parts of that DPI formula was customer cars. And that part hasn't really transitioned over except for Porsche.
Yeah, and a couple things to think about here. Number one, they've actually sort of done a 180 in the past 5 or so years, between, or not even 5 years, more like 3, with the introduction of the GTP class. They now have a larger focus on customer racing on the GT side of things, where they're taking a lot more in-house customer racing with Corvettes. We see that with TF Sport over in the WEC. We see that with AWA and IMSA. I wonder if that's just where their focus is right now, and it would quite frankly be a little bit too much to bring in right now under their current constraints. You got to think of GM here as one entity. The other thing is, let's say I'm banging down the door here and I'm telling Laura or Cadillac that I'm going to give them all the money they want so that I can run a Cadillac GTP car in IMSA and the WEC, because I want to run a dual program.
Oh,
let's be honest. Under the Rain Race Podcast Racing. Okay, I want to enter one car. I want to enter 2 cars. Is there enough space in the championships right now to accommodate that? Or is there potentially pushback from the series saying, well, we can't guarantee you extra entries on the grid right now under our current capacity. The WEC right now is at pretty much a max capacity of 37 cars. They want to expand it to 40 for next season, but we're already getting the introduction of Aston Martin next year. Could get the introduction of many more GT3 teams as far as I'm concerned. We might see the addition of another Cadillac there next year, but do they really have the capacity to support another 2 customer cars? Does IMSA have the capacity to support those extra cars with a record grid at Daytona or I guess not record grid at Daytona? It was close to record grid at Daytona.
Yeah.
Tied for the record grid at Sebring in a couple of weeks. Is that really something that the series can accommodate? Not sure, but another question that I have. And then something that a couple of people have already said is that the new cars, LMDH, Hypercar, whichever one you decide to go down, a lot more expensive than the DPI cars that came before it, and they're a lot more complex with the hybrid system. There has to be a lot more involvement from the manufacturer on assisting those customer programs. A lot less turnkey than we saw with the DPI style cars.
Well, I have an easy solution for this. Cadillac goes out and builds a track day only hypercar like Ferrari did, and sell it for like, $7 million a pop or whatever. And there you go. You fund another hypercar entry.
Yep. And then also, just as someone said here, DPIs weren't pocket change. The LMDH is cheaper than LMH. But I'd have to imagine that the current GTP cars are still a lot more expensive than we had with the DPI class cars.
Yeah.
So
a
couple of different things to think about there. I'm going to read through, see if you have any thoughts while I pull something out of here.
Let's see.
Yeah. Well, I can say here, somebody was saying the issue is supply chains. GM's mentioned it before. Porsche's had their issue with the 963 supply chain. Yeah, you already mentioned that. And I think that was their particular hurdle with now bringing a second factory car to the WEC for the full season. I would imagine that something similar has been holding them back with doing customer cars. But whether that's the only factor or not, that's not what I'm 100% sure on. And also, do those supply chain issues go away? How long is this formula going to be around? Not exactly sure right now, but I'd hope it's around for at least a few more seasons.
Those customer teams are hoping it's going to be around for a few more seasons.
Are those supply chain issues going to be still lingering in a couple of seasons from now? I'm not sure. I think it might be something deep F1 related. There's got to be something F1 related. Somebody said DPI was substantially cheaper, like we just mentioned. Is there a limit a car manufacturer must follow for customer cars? No. That's the one thing that they don't have to follow. They're not obligated to produce customer cars.
It's not like GT3 where you have to produce X number of customer cars.
Yeah. It's especially GTP is a class that is designed to be customer friendly. It's designed to be something that, I guess I should specify LMDH cars here because we're seeing a lot of customer LMDH cars in the WEC as well, not just, actually, we're not seeing as many in IMSA as we're seeing in the WEC. So the cars, though, the teams that we have in the WEC and in IMSA that are customer teams, actually performance-wise are not struggling a whole lot.
Yeah.
But I forget my point here. I'm going to be fully honest. I forget what I was saying with that, but it was something to do with the limit for customer cars. Maybe it'll come back to me. And this is just touching on about the Cadillac. They need at least an alternate setup option for these races under the Cadillac banner. Just compare with the amount of data that Porsche and Ferrari now gather on a race weekend. Absolutely.
Yeah. There's only so much that SimData is going to do for you, right?
And they know that. They're not stupid. They bring 3 cars to Le Mans. They make sure that they have all the cars they possibly can for the big race. But for the other races in the championship, something they could still improve on. All right. I can come back to that at the end of the episode if anybody has any more things, questions, or comments they would like to get in there. A couple of weeks from now, though, we have the second race of the IMSA season, and it is one of the most difficult races on the schedule, Stu. It is the 12 Hours of Sebring. And we got some new cars racing in IMSA this year. And you already mentioned earlier with the Corvette, we're going to put that reliability through its ringer at Sebring, because I think Sebring might be more of a reliability ringer than Daytona.
Yeah, I think that's safe to say. All those new GT3 cars or GTD cars are going to be kind of put through the ringer there. You know, Ford hasn't exactly had a clean track record either, so could be big for them. Aston Martin, although it's largely built off of their old car, still a lot that's new with that car. So it's gonna be an interesting race to watch. We got news today, and this I saw a tweet from the legendary Lanky Turtle that 59 entries have been confirmed for the 12 Hours of Sebring, which is the same number as the Rolex 24. There is a slight change to the actual field, though. It looks like we've lost the Kelly Moss number 92, and we have gained, of course, the Lamborghini SC63, making its IMSA debut after making its worldwide debut at the WEC opener in Qatar. So this is the 59 entries is a lot for Sebring. This is the highest number of entries for this race since the merger, which was 63 cars that were on the grid for the 2014 edition of this race. So, you know, we could still squeeze a few more on there, although I guess the pit stalls we need now are a little bit larger than in 2014 with these LMDH cars, but still a very impressive field at Sebring as well. You can probably expect a little bit of carnage. Of course, mentioned it, Lamborghini SC63. You're going to see so much focus put on that. They're going to be making their IMSA debut with the number 19 car. There's going to be lots of great storylines to watch from that race. How does Porsche follow up their Rolex 24 win? Cadillac won here last year. They looked really strong at the Rolex. How do they rebound? Do we get some... hopefully we don't have an incident the same way that we did last year, where we took out the top, I think, 3 runners with under an hour to go. But traffic management is going to be a huge issue at Sebring. We're talking about how it was at Qatar. Sebring, narrow track, bumpy, not much of, it's going to be one to watch, and how traffic is managed there. And I'm going to be really interested to see how the GTD Pro class sort of rebounds after the Rolex 24. We saw a huge explosion in interest and entries in that class. Basically, we doubled the full season entries for GTD Pro, and we had something like 5 cars that fully DNF'd from the Rolex, and I think only the top 3 or 4 were actually within 1 lap of the leader. So, it was a war of attrition in that class, and we've had some incredible races from GTD Pro and dating back to the GTLM days. So that professional GT class is definitely going to be one to watch for, I think, at Sebring. But Chris, what are you looking forward to this year's Sebring, 12 Hours of Sebring?
There's a lot to look forward to, as far as I'm concerned. First of all, I'll correct myself and call myself a liar, because I just 5 minutes ago said this was a record grid at Sebring, and then you ever so graciously corrected me and said that it's not the record. Was 2014 a record with 63? That I don't know.
Well, okay, so I'm going to cover my tracks here. I did get all of this information from the legendary Lanky Turtle. So, we even if he is incorrect, I mean, we can't give him that much of a hard time, right?
No, not for getting us all the testing footage.
That's true.
Well, 59, I guess, confirmed right now. When we get the official entry
well, they
released,
I think they released like pit allocation or something along those lines today, which is where he was getting that from.
Okay. So what am I looking forward to the most? Well, first of all, the Lamborghini introduction into IMSA. As we mentioned earlier, their WEC debut was not anything to be disappointed about, but it was nothing really to say was noteworthy. I'll be curious on the IMSA side of things how they get along. They got a completely different driver lineup in that car for the MEC races in IMSA this year compared to their WEC lineup. And then also we're talking about putting Corvette and some of the newer GT3 cars through the ringer at Sebring. That's going to be the ultimate test for Lamborghini with going into Sebring as their debut with that car. Be interested to see how they fare. It is an IMSA race at Sebring, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see a late last hour yellow that bunches up the field and gives us a lot of drama. Now, Porsche is going to be hoping that they don't have that repeat of last year and destroy their perfect 2024 season so far between IMSA and the WEC. I think they're going to be the ones to watch. They've gone undefeated right now between the Rolex 24. They were the Asian Le Mans Series GT3 champions. They won the Bathurst 12-hour. They won Qatar. The 963 in itself is undefeated in 2024.
Yeah.
And they're going to be the favorite. As far as I'm concerned, they've got 4 cars racing at Sebring. Again, we're talking about strength in numbers. Going to be big for them there. And then also the ultimate test, I suppose, of their new reliability upgrades. If Daytona didn't shake them to bits, then maybe Sebring will. I'm also looking forward to the GT3 rematch, though. I think Daytona, as you mentioned, became a bit of a race of attrition. Some of these teams now have more data under their belt. Maybe they'll make it the full distance this time, keep the cars clean. If we do get a final hour shootout, that could be an absolute barn burner to watch. And I'm excited to see who's the favorites in the GT category right now. Apart from that, there's not a whole lot to complain about with Sebring. Just looking forward to seeing what we get on track this year.
And one of the things that amazed me, and realizing this is kind of wild, that Wayne Taylor Racing hasn't won a race yet with the Acura, and which is wild. And they have to be hungry to try and break through there, especially they have that second car now, and a very strong second car. You got to think that after they were involved in that accident last year as well, and looked like had a very good chance to potentially pull out the win, and they're going to be hungry. Yeah,
definitely. I would see them as a potential front runner with that second car under their belt right now. Strong team at Daytona. They had the issues with the 40 car. But actually the 10 car had a issue as well.
Yeah.
Both of them had issues at Daytona. But for Sebring, I think that could be a good chance for them to rebound, get that first win. And really, one of the keys to the 24 season that I mentioned before Daytona is Wayne Taylor Racing has to get some consistency under their belt. With the 40 car, they got that podium at Daytona. If they can follow it up with another podium at Sebring, if they can follow it up with a race win at Sebring, that's putting them in a decent position in the championship right now. But they're going to have to really put together a good effort there. We got this is a rare one, but we got a $20 super chat from Abel Dog in the chat. And I want to take your question here, but I also want to thank you very much for the donation there. Jeff Gordon was on the Dale Jr. Download, talked about the charter holdout in NASCAR, and brought up Hendrick's favorite car was Corvette. Said Hendrick ran an IMSA before. Can you see Hendrick expanding to IMSA? Go
ahead.
Oh, right.
I was just gonna say, oh man, we were matching each other word for word there. I was gonna say they do kind of have a pretty close association with Action Express Racing.
Yeah,
is my understanding of things right now. Of course, they ran that 48 with Jimmy Johnson. For was it 2 years? I think that they did that. So they have to hold a pretty close relationship there. Maybe
we were just talking about customer Cadillacs. Does it count as a customer car? Does it count as an extra Action Express car? I'm not sure. But yeah, I would love to see that car back. That was a fan favorite, especially with its livery. Put Jimmy Johnson in that car. That'd be great. I think it's less likely right now, to be quite honest with you. Maybe as the class matures a little bit and we have more opportunities for customer cars, perhaps we might see them try to bring that car back with Action Express, with a Cadillac GTP car, at least for the Michelin endurance races. I think a full season IMSA program is a bit less likely. But well, we'll have to see. It would be really cool to see them try to put together a Corvette GT3 program at Le Mans. I would love to see something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's in the cards for them or not, again, I don't really think so.
Yeah.
But it would be really cool to see them at least attempt it. And hey, put a customer GT3 car in Le Mans. You could also race it in the big IMSA races as well. So
It's true.
maybe that's something that they would have to consider.
I think that of current NASCAR teams that would be most likely to jump over into the IMSA pond, I think RFK and Brad Keselowski has mentioned that they are actively exploring an expansion to IMSA. Of course, they're a Ford team in NASCAR, so the natural partner there would be with Ford, and they've always been one of those manufacturers that sends their NASCAR drivers to especially the Michelin Pilot Challenge race before the Rolex 24 to get them some seat time in a road course environment to help their NASCAR drivers. I could see them come over to IMSA in some sort of a program. And then the other one that really pops into my mind is Trackhouse. Of course, they are expanding to so many different forms of motorsports. I think was it MotoGP? I think they have a team in now. They signed at the beginning of this season one of the eventual Rolex 24 winners in the LMP2 class and friend of the show, Connor Zilic. And whether that's, with the intent of him coming over to NASCAR at some point or whatnot, I could see Trackhouse, and Justin Marks, the owner of that team, has an extensive background in road course racing. So, and I think maybe raced in IMSA in the past. I'd have to double check, but I think those two teams right now would probably be a better, more likely to jump over with a program. Albeit I think that's still unlikely and probably a few years away.
Yep. Yeah. Justin Marks, not mistaken, ran with Meyer Shank back in the Acura GT3 days. Although somebody, actually, Abel Dog said he raced with Lexus. So maybe he raced with both. I'm fairly sure he raced with Meyer Shank when they had their GT3 car. Yeah, and obviously got mentioned that that Hendrick ran at Le Mans last year with the famous and fan favorite Garage 56 car, which I can safely say we're not going to be seeing that car run anymore. But
it was a pretty cool video that was it not Motor Trend. They had the video where Jordan Taylor got in they compared a whole bunch of cars at VIR. That was pretty cool.
I believe it was Road and Track.
Yes.
The Lightning Lap. Yeah, I did see that.
That was really neat to see.
Yep. All right. I'm going to do a quick sweep, the old quick sweep. And I will say, we've gotten a lot of chat messages on this episode, which is both a great thing, but it also makes it very difficult for me to make sure we got everything without missing anybody. So if I did happen to miss your question in this episode, I do apologize about that, and try to get to it in the future.
While you're looking through some of these comments, just mention here, there is some sports car racing on this weekend. The VP Sports Car Challenge is on, supporting IndyCar at St. Pete. Both of those races are on Saturday. And I believe they're both on Peacock, if I'm not mistaken. And of course they'll be on IMSA TV. And then for the 12 hours of Sebring, it's not just even though it's not Super Sebring this year, we don't have the WEC there. While that's a bit of a bummer, it means that there's a ton more IMSA Sports Series that are going to be showing up there. You're going to have the MX5 Cup, which runs incredibly well at Sebring. One of my favorite finishes of all time in that series came at Sebring. I think it was 3 years ago, potentially. A 3-wide finish where you could throw a blanket over all of the cars. It was incredible. You're going to have Pilot Challenge. You're going to have Lamborghini Super Trofeo, Porsche Carrera Cup. There's going to be a ton of racing on at Sebring for all of us to consume and enjoy.
Yes, support IMSA Support Series.
Yes.
The bees, are they going to be at St. Pete? I didn't hear you mention them. Oh
no,
the
they
bees.
moved them. Yeah, they were at St. Pete, which, to be fair, I didn't think that St. Pete was a great track for them to run at anyways. So I'm much more excited to watch them at Sebring.
Yeah, they did put on a good race at St. Pete last year, though. Regardless,
yes,
or maybe a boring race by MX5 standards. I think the finish was only like 0.2 of a second between the leaders at the line or something like that.
Yeah, St. Pete was always the one track where they would get spread out a little bit more. Yeah. They hard to pack race at St. Pete.
Be impressive if they did. So we were going back. I'm just going to go back here really quick. We were discussing whether or not Cadillac would have the capacity to put additional cars on the grid in IMSA or the WEC with the pretty much capacity grids that they have right now. Koi in the chat said with more GT3s, maybe Acura, one Aston Martin, a second Lamborghini, a second Cadillac. I find it hard to see how small teams like Asada Fraschini stay on the grid for next season. And this has been something that I've discussed in episodes in the past, but you're right, where it's that they're sort of the likely first pick to shove to the side, but not one that I would really agree with, because ultimately the day will come someday, and hopefully it's not soon enough that we get to talk about it on this podcast, but where all the manufacturers start trickling out of the prototype class. This has happened in Group C. It's happened with LMP1. It's happened with every single class, pretty much, in sports car racing history. It happened with GTE recently. So that day will come, and then we're going to rely on the boutique manufacturers a lot more and the customer teams a lot more. So finding a balance right there and not upsetting those boutique manufacturers and those customer teams. We already saw Van Wall, who wanted to race in the championship this year. They were sort of shoved aside for a season. Hopefully they can make a return in the future if they do want to return to the championship. But it's something that I always sort of keep in the back of my head, because you're going to want those manufacturers to stay happy at some point down the road. And I'll tell you what, I think that covers it for this episode. We previewed Sebring in a couple weeks. We went over Qatar. We got a lot of racing coming here. After Sebring, we're sort of into the swing with IMSA. We got Long Beach coming up not too long after that, I don't believe. What is it? When was April?
It might be
when in April.
3 weeks after, maybe, something like that.
Imola, we're waiting about another 5 weeks for that, but we're going to start to get into the swing of things. Before you know it, it will be the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and that is when I get to talk about 62 cars and 23 cars in the hypercar category, and that's going to be a fun time. But until then, I want to say thank you very much for tuning into this episode. Again, we had a great turnout for tonight's episode, and I really appreciate everybody who tuned in live. And if you're listening after the show on any podcasting platform, appreciate you tuning in as well. Going to say thanks for listening tonight, and hope to catch you in 2 weeks for another episode of the Rain Race Podcast. Take care.